Hey, so I want to make this video based on the LeetCode problem here, minimum cost to move chips to the same position. It was the weekly LeetCode challenge, so that's how it caught my attention. Uh, doing this problem, it was a little bit more harder to understand what the question is asking for, but once you realize what the question is really asking for, it was actually pretty easy. So essentially what it is, let's see the problem description here. We need to move all the chips to the same position in one step, and we could change the position of the ith chip from position I. So uh, these are the rule sets that they give you, where essentially if you're moving from position I and you move +2 or -2, it costs 0, and 1 plus 1 or -1, it costs 1. So that means if from position 1 moves to 3, it's gonna cost 0. So in this case right here, 3 moves to 1 and it costs 0, and so these are stacked up, and then you have position 2 cost, and then they stack up finally, and it costs 1. So the output was 1. So when you have this one here, if you look at it, these are already pre-stacked, and you could see that from the evens and odds, we only return the minimum. So essentially we're just stacking them up and then returning the minimum of those values, because that's how much it costs to stack them onto the bigger stack. Um, so what might be a little confusing is maybe because it has multiple, the amount of positions that it could have is 10 to the ninth. So you could have positions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but it really doesn't matter because all the odds moving to the next odd, it costs essentially 0, or it is 0. So here is the coding solution, how I'm going to do it. I'm going to use a hash table or a hash map, or they're called dictionaries for Swift. They're very powerful data structure. You're always going to get O-of-N solution usually for array problems using a hash map. So if you could get familiar with them, basically doing anything like counting the amount of occurrences, a hash map is very powerful for those. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get the total cost equals 0. That's going to be the result essentially. And I'm going to make my hash map here, or dictionary. That's what it's called for Swift. I'm going to loop through the array and give it a position. So the position is going to be, when I go through the array, I'm going to get the position of each index, or the value of each index. So it's going to be non-modulus 2. So for this example here, if I get 2s, 2 modulus 2 is going to be 0, and that means it's even, right? So I'm going to put that into my dictionary here. And this syntax, I'll explain it after I finish this position. So essentially what this might look a little confusing, especially if you're not familiar with Swift, but essentially what this is doing is that it's going to store into this position here, position 0 for this case, or if it was an odd, it would have been position bank and then 1. So what it's essentially doing is checking if it already exists, and if it does exist, it's going to return whatever the value, the amount of times it occurred, and then add it by 1. So and if it doesn't exist, so if that's the first occurrence, we have to do a nil coalescence, so it would look something like this. It will look something like that instead. But if this already occurred, it's going to return the value of 1. So that's essentially what it's doing. So we're just storing them into the dictionary. Total cost equals min. And we're just going to, essentially what we're going to do is after we store them all into odds and evens and categorize them that way, we're just going to return the minimum because that's the amount of cost that it will take. So let me write this here, position 0. And we have the nil coalescence here because this could return 0. Potentially we could just have an input of something like 1 1 1 1, and we're gonna have 0 2s, or zero amount of evens in here. So if this happens, the cost will be 0. Um, so that's why we have the 0 there. And for those who don't know what nil coalescence is, it's essentially if this returns nil, it's going to return this value instead. So we do that. Position, bang. Then return the total cost. So just run the code. Yep, it works. So submit. Right. So yep. I mean, hash tables. I will get familiar with them. This is definitely doable without a hash table. You could just do something like, var odd, var even, and have like some like if dictionaries are too confusing like this, you could just do it like this way instead, and just store them. If you get modulus of equals 1, then you put it into the odd, and vice versa, then you put it into even. But I think understanding hash tables is very powerful. So I would definitely, this is one of the problems I think practicing dictionaries is very good, or hash tables or hash maps.